It was a regular Thursday morning in the heart of the city. The streets buzzed with early commuters, and the scent of fresh coffee floated out of nearby cafes. People hurried into office buildings, heads down, focused on starting their day. In the middle of this usual rush, a tall, calm man in his early 40s stepped out of a black sedan in front of a glass-fronted bank. He adjusted the collar of his light gray jacket and looked up at the name on the building. It was a name he knew very well. In fact, it was now his name too, at least in ownership. Jamal Reynolds, CEO of one of the fastest-growing financial firms in the country, had recently led a successful acquisition of this banking chain. What made it even more meaningful was that this bank had once rejected him for a loan years ago, back when he was a young entrepreneur with nothing but an idea and a dream. Now he owned it. But today wasn't about pride or proving anything. It was about something much simpler: getting a clear picture of how his branches were treating everyday customers. Jamal believed in quiet leadership. He didn't always wear tailored suits or surround himself with security. On this morning, he looked just like any other professional: clean, neat, and soft-spoken. He chose not to bring his assistant or any top-level executives with him. Instead, he decided to walk in alone and see how the staff treated someone they didn't recognize. No cameras, no scheduled visits, no alerts. Just a quiet check dash in dot as he stepped inside the bank. A burst of cool air greeted him. The lobby was clean and bright, with cream-colored floors and small potted plants lining the corners. A large digital screen welcomed customers with cheerful messages. Several people sat in line, some scrolling through phones, others tapping their feet impatiently. Jamal took a moment to take it all in. He loved details: how people were greeted, whether the lines moved quickly, and if customers felt seen and heard. That, to him, was what made a great business. He quietly joined the line, nodding politely at the elderly woman standing ahead of him. She smiled back, noticing his notepad. He scribbled a few quick notes. Lobby clean, staff looks busy, customers. Waiting quietly, nothing seemed out of place, at least not yet. After about 10 minutes, his turn came. He walked up to the front desk, where a woman in her late 40s sat typing quickly. She wore a neatly pressed shirt, a staff badge, and glasses that occasionally slipped down her nose. Her name tag read Karen Whitmore, branch manager. Without looking up, she said flatly, "Yes?" Jamal responded kindly, "Good morning. I'd like to speak with someone about my account." Karen paused, looked up briefly, then glanced him over with clear disinterest. "Are you here for a personal account or business?" "Personal," Jamal replied. She gave a short sigh. "We're not accepting walk-in consultations today. You need an appointment." "That's all right," he said calmly. "I can wait. If needed, it's important." Karen's tone grew firmer. "Sir, I said we are not accepting anyone without appointments. You'll have to come back another day." Jamal, still polite, said, "I understand, but I'm actually here to—" "Listen," she interrupted. "We've had people coming in all week, trying to sell things or talk to our clients. If this is about business or networking, we don't allow that here." Jamal blinked, surprised. "I'm not here to sell anything." Karen folded her arms, now visibly annoyed. "Sir, you need to leave, now." He looked at her silently for a moment. Her voice had risen just enough for the nearby customers to glance over, some frowning, others pretending not to notice. One of the tellers behind her gave a nervous glance toward the manager, then quickly looked down again. Jamal kept his voice even and respectful. "May I ask your name again?" She looked confused, then gestured at her badge. "Karen Whitmore, I'm the manager here. And I'm asking you to leave before I call someone to escort you out." He paused. "You may want to reconsider how you're speaking to me." Karen raised an eyebrow, arms still crossed. "Is that a threat?" Jamal shook his head gently. "No, it's a suggestion." At that point, Karen reached for the phone at her desk. "I'm calling security," Jamal nodded. "All right. I'll step outside and make a call too." He turned slowly and walked out of the branch. His calm presence never wavered. He wasn't angry, just disappointed. This wasn't how anyone should be treated, especially in a place meant to help people. But what struck him the most wasn't that he, the CEO, was spoken to this way. It was the uncomfortable thought of how many others had been treated the same, without a voice or the power to do anything about it. Outside, the sun was still shining, and the streets still moved with the same energy. Jamal pulled out his phone and made a quick call to his executive assistant. "Get me the regional director," he said simply, "right now." Back inside the branch, Karen hung up the phone. After calling for a security check, she shook her head and mumbled, "Some people just don't get it." The staff around her looked uneasy. No one said anything, but the room felt colder than before. What none of them knew yet was that the man they had just dismissed was not only their new boss, but also someone who had once walked in the shoes of the customers they served. He had once been judged, overlooked, and underestimated. And though he had risen far above those early struggles, he had never forgotten them. That's why he was here today, to make sure his business served every person with respect, fairness, and dignity. 7 minutes later, the quiet CEO would return not alone, not angry, but with a message that would change this branch forever. Jamal stepped out of the bank's glass doors and into the busy streets of the city. The cool morning air seemed to clear his thoughts, though his mind was still processing the interaction that had just unfolded. He could hear the distant hum of traffic, the occasional honk of a car, and the footsteps of people rushing by, each person lost in their own world. But for Jamal, everything seemed to slow down as he dialed his phone. He waited a few moments for the call to connect. As the phone rang, he looked back at the bank, his mind racing. He wasn't angry, not really. Disappointed, yes, but not angry. It wasn't the first time he had experienced dismissive behavior. Years ago, when he was just starting out, he'd been ignored and turned away countless times. But he'd always used those moments as fuel to push harder, to prove to himself and to others that he was more than the labels they had placed on him. The phone clicked, and a voice on the other end answered. "Jamal, what's going on?" It was Tiffany, his trusted executive assistant. "I need you to get me the regional director. Right now, no questions, just do it." Tiffany's voice was always calm and efficient. "Got it, I'll have him. Call you in a few minutes." Jamal hung up and leaned against the cool marble pillar outside the bank. His eyes were fixed on the building, but his thoughts drifted. The interaction with Karen, the branch manager, had been unsettling. It wasn't just about how she'd treated him. It was the realization that she likely treated other customers the same way, without a second thought. How many people had walked in, needing assistance or just trying to make a simple transaction, and left feeling like they were invisible? Jamal didn't know for sure, but he had a feeling. His business was all about customer care, about building relationships, not just processing transactions. In his own firm, he had spent years creating a culture of respect and inclusivity, making sure everyone, regardless of their background, was treated with dignity. It had been a long road, one filled with setbacks, failures, and moments when people doubted him. But Jamal knew that those experiences shaped who he was today. The sound of the phone vibrating in his pocket brought him back to the present. He glanced down to see that the regional director, Mark Harris, was calling. "Mark, I need you to come to this branch." "Now," Jamal said without any preamble. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a nervous chuckle. "This sounds serious. What's going on?" Jamal's voice remained calm but firm. "It's serious. I just walked into the branch and I was denied service. I was treated like I was an unwanted guest, and I need you to get here and fix it. Now." Mark's tone shifted, now more focused. "Understood, I'm on my way." Jamal pocketed his phone and took a slow breath. He wasn't the kind of person who liked drama or confrontation, but there were moments when silence wasn't enough. Sometimes standing by and doing nothing was worse than making a stand, and today he had to make one. He had a responsibility, not just as the CEO, but as someone who genuinely cared about the people this bank was supposed to serve. As he stood there, waiting for Mark to arrive, Jamal found himself thinking back to his early days as an entrepreneur. He remembered the countless meetings where he had been dismissed because of his age, his race, or the fact that he didn't have the traditional businessman look. He'd sat across from bankers, investors, and potential partners who barely looked him in the eye. He recalled the frustration, the sting of rejection, and how each one of those moments had pushed him to work even harder. In some ways, this moment was a reflection of that past. He was now in a position of power, but the world of business still had a long way to go. It wasn't enough to have the right skills, the right strategy, or even the right ideas. It took more than that. It required people to see you, to understand that you were capable and deserving. No matter who you were or where you came from, Jamal glanced up at the bank again, his expression hardening. He had acquired the institution for a reason to change it, to make it better. He wanted to ensure that this bank wasn't just a place that processed financial transactions, but a place where every person who walked in felt seen, heard, and valued. He wasn't going to let one manager's rude behavior set the tone for what the company stood for. Within a few minutes, Mark pulled up in his car, stepping out quickly with a sense of urgency in his stride. Jamal gave him a nod and they both walked back toward the bank together. "I'll handle this," Jamal said, his voice low. He wasn't angry, but there was a sharpness in his words that suggested he wouldn't be backing down. Mark nodded and followed him inside. As they re-entered the branch, the staff seemed to freeze. The energy in the room shifted, as though everyone suddenly realized that something was about to happen. Karen, who had been behind the counter, looked up in surprise as Jamal walked in. The color drained from her face when she recognized him. She had no idea who he was when she'd first interacted with him. But now, seeing him walk in with the regional director, her nervousness was evident. "Ms. Whitmore," Jamal said, his voice even but firm, "we need to talk." Karen stood, frozen for a moment before she collected herself. I don't understand," she stammered. "I didn't realize who you were." "I was just trying to do my job." Jamal nodded slowly. "I understand that you were trying to do your job, but the way you treated me was completely unacceptable. It wasn't just about me. It's about how we treat everyone who walks through these doors." Mark stepped forward, his presence adding to the tension in the room. "What exactly happened here?" he asked Karen, his voice steady but with an edge of concern. Karen quickly explained her side, trying to justify her actions. "I thought he was here to cause trouble. We've had issues with people walking in without appointments, trying to sell things, and I didn't know who he was. I didn't mean to be disrespectful." Jamal listened patiently but didn't let her words distract him. He had heard enough. Respect isn't something that's optional here. It's something we expect from everyone, whether they're a client or an employee. There was a long pause as the weight of his words sank in. Karen's face flushed and she looked around at the other employees, most of whom avoided making eye contact. Jamal's disappointment was clear, and it was evident that his quiet confidence was making an impact. The room grew tense, but Jamal wasn't finished. "You're right," he continued, his tone softer but still firm. "You didn't know who I was. But that's part of the problem. No one here took the time to see me as a person. You judged me before I even spoke. And that's not how we operate in this bank. We treat everyone with respect, no exceptions." The room was still. You could almost hear the quiet hum of the ceiling lights above. No one moved, no one spoke. All eyes were on Jamal as he stood there, calm and collected, but clearly in control. Karen Whitmore, the branch manager who had dismissed him earlier, now stood across from him with an uncertain expression on her face. She looked nervous, confused, maybe even a little embarrassed. She had no idea that the man she had just ordered to leave the building was actually the CEO, the person who now owned the very bank she worked for. Jamal didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone was powerful. Every word he spoke had weight. Every glance carried meaning. And though he didn't say much, everyone could tell he wasn't happy with what had just happened. Behind him stood Mark Harris, the regional director, and beside him, two other senior leaders from the corporate office who had arrived after receiving a call from Jamal's assistant. Their arrival wasn't planned. This wasn't a scheduled visit. But they all understood the importance of the situation as soon as they were told what had happened. When the CEO makes a surprise visit and gets denied service, something is clearly wrong. Jamal looked at Karen and spoke in a calm but serious tone. Let's talk in your office. Karen nodded quickly and led the way, her steps suddenly quieter than before. Jamal walked behind her, followed by Mark and the two senior executives. The rest of the staff and customers remained in the lobby, whispering softly and exchanging curious glances. No one knew exactly what was going on, but they could sense it was something important. Inside the office, the door was closed gently behind them. The room was small and tidy, with a wooden desk, a few chairs, and some framed photos on the walls, family, certificates, and a few motivational quotes. Karen sat down slowly, folding her hands nervously. Jamal stayed standing for a moment, then finally took a seat across from her. Mark and the others stood quietly nearby, watching. I want to begin by saying I didn't come here today to cause trouble, Jamal said, his voice steady. I came because I believe in checking things for myself. I believe in understanding how our branches operate on a regular day when no one knows they're being watched. Karen looked down, her eyes focused on a spot on her desk. But what I experienced today, he continued, was not acceptable. Karen opened her mouth to speak, but Jamal gently raised a hand. Please let me finish. She nodded silently. You didn't recognize me. That's fine. I didn't expect you. 2. I didn't wear a suit. I didn't walk in with an assistant or introduce myself with a title. I came in like any regular customer would. And how you treated me. He paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully. It made me realize this isn't just about me. It's about everyone who walks into this branch. Mark nodded slightly. Jamal, I want to say, on behalf of the team, that we take this seriously. We'll be reviewing all procedures. I'm not here for apologies, Jamal said gently. I'm here for accountability. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I'm sorry, she said softly. I didn't mean to be rude, I thought you were someone trying to sell something. We've had people come in like that, and we have a policy? Policies are important, Jamal interrupted, but the way we treat people matters more. Even if I was here to ask a question, or even if I didn't have an appointment, the way you spoke to me didn't come from a policy. It came from assumption. Karen didn't respond. Her hands remained clasped tightly in front of her. Jamal leaned forward slightly, looking her in the eyes. I want you to think about something. If I had looked different, if I had walked in wearing a suit, or looked like a high-level executive, would you have reacted the same way? Karen didn't answer right away. She looked down, clearly struggling with the question. I'm not here to accuse, Jamal said. I'm here to open a conversation. One we need to have not just in this branch, but across every branch we own. Mark took a breath and stepped forward. I agree. We need better training, clearer values. In how we treat customers? Respect and patience should be the foundation of every interaction, Jamal nodded. Exactly, and that begins with leadership. Karen looked up again, her voice quiet. I understand. I really do. I let my guard down. I didn't treat you, or anyone, really, the way I should have. I assumed things I shouldn't have. I realize now how wrong that was. There was a silence in the room, not uncomfortable but thoughtful. Jamal appreciated that she was willing to reflect, to admit her mistake. But his responsibility wasn't just to accept an apology, it was to ensure the entire organization moved forward in a better direction. He looked at the two senior executives. I'd like a full review of all front desk and customer interaction procedures in this region. I want feedback from customers, not just internal reports. They nodded. One of them took notes on a tablet. As for this branch, Jamal continued, I want every employee here to go through updated customer service training. And I want a new hiring and training plan in place within 2 weeks. Karen's expression changed. There was concern in her eyes, but also something else, maybe a sense of realization. She had misjudged someone, and now she was seeing the bigger picture. We can do better, Jamal said. But it starts with honesty, with looking at our blind spots and fixing them. I don't expect perfection, but I do expect respect. He stood up slowly, signaling the meeting was over. Mark opened the door, and they all began to walk out of the office. As Jamal passed Karen, he paused. "One more thing," he said. "This isn't about punishing one person. It's about changing a culture. I hope you'll be part of that change, but that's up to you." Karen nodded silently, eyes lowered. She knew this moment would stay with her for a long time. It wasn't just a warning, it was a wake-up call. Back in the main lobby, the mood had changed. Staff members straightened up, customers looked on curiously, and a few even whispered to each other as Jamal passed by. He didn't stop to make a speech or announce who he was. He didn't need to. His presence had already said enough. As he stepped outside again, the sun was a little warmer than before, the air just as fresh. He took a deep breath and looked up at the building one last time. This was more than a visit. It was a reminder to everyone inside, and perhaps even to himself, that leadership isn't about titles or offices. It's about action, about standing up for values, even when no one's watching, and in just a few minutes he had done exactly that. The morning after the meeting was a busy one for Jamal. His phone rang constantly, with messages and calls from various people within his company and the bank's leadership team. Everyone wanted to know what had happened at the branch, what steps he planned to take, and how they could support the changes he'd promised. But Jamal didn't rush. He didn't need to. He already knew what needed to be done, and he was prepared to lead by example. He sat in his office, sipping on his second cup of coffee of the day, quietly reflecting on the events that had transpired just 24 hours earlier. The conversation with Karen Whitmore had been difficult, but it had also been important. And it wasn't just about her. It was about creating a culture where every employee, whether they were a manager or a teller, understood that respect, dignity, and fairness were non-negotiable. No exceptions. Jamal thought back to his own experiences when he was just starting out. He had faced so many obstacles that could have knocked him off course: rejection from investors, underestimation from peers, and the constant struggle of proving himself in a business world that didn't always make space for people like him. But those challenges had made him stronger. They had shaped his vision for the kind of company he wanted to run, one that didn't just focus on profits, but on people. It was a quiet kind of revolution, one that didn't shout, but that was persistent, one that could be built slowly, brick by brick, in every branch, every department, and every interaction with a customer. That afternoon, Jamal called for a company-wide video conference. He needed to communicate with all the regional directors, senior managers, and department heads. The message was clear: change was coming. And it was coming fast. As the video call began, Jamal's face appeared on the screen, calm and composed. As always, the heads of the various departments, some smiling, some serious, looked at him expectantly. "Good afternoon, everyone," Jamal began. "I'm sure by now you've heard about the incident that took place at one of our branches yesterday. I want to address it openly with all of you because this goes beyond just one bad interaction. This is about who we are as a company, and more importantly, how we treat people." He paused for a moment to let the words sink in. Jamal wasn't about to sugarcoat anything. Everyone on this call needed to hear the truth. "I don't care about titles," he continued, his voice steady but strong. "I don't care about what your job is, your years of experience, or your rank. Everyone who works here is part of a team. And that team, whether it's a frontline teller or a CEO, must operate with the same respect for one another." The room was silent for a moment. You could tell the words were hitting home. Jamal had set the tone. It wasn't about blame or pointing fingers. It was about setting a standard. "I've already spoken with Karen Whitmore, the branch manager involved," Jamal said, "and I've made it clear that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated. But this is not just about one person. We all need to do better, every single one of us." He looked at the faces on the screen, some nodding, others taking notes. The message was clear. This wasn't a one-off incident. This was part of a larger issue, and it was time for a change. "We are going to do something about it," Jamal continued. "We're implementing a company-wide training program, one that focuses on customer interaction, cultural sensitivity, and respect. Every single employee, from the tellers to the senior leadership, We'll go through this program. We'll be setting up new guidelines for how we communicate with our customers and how we can all improve our daily interactions with them. He looked down at his notes and then back up at the screen. It starts with leadership. And that means you. If you're in a position of power, it's your job to lead by example. I expect everyone on this call to take this seriously and to implement these changes immediately. The room was quiet again. Jamal could feel the weight of the moment, but he wasn't about to back down. He knew this wouldn't be easy. It would take time, effort, and consistent dedication. But he also knew it was the right thing to do. I'm not just talking about customer service, Jamal added. I'm talking about building a culture of inclusivity where people feel valued, seen, and heard, where we recognize our biases and work to remove them, where we don't just talk about diversity, we live it. There was a pause as the leaders on the call digested his words. Some exchanged glances and a few took a deep breath. Change was coming, whether they were ready or not. Jamal wrapped up the call with one final thought. I want a full report from each of you in the next 2 weeks. I want to know what steps you've taken, what improvements you've made, and how we can continue to hold ourselves accountable. We will follow up and we will check in regularly. I don't want this to be a one-time fix. I want this to be a permanent change in how we operate. As the video call ended, Jamal leaned back in his chair, satisfied with the message he had delivered. Now, the real work began. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Jamal and his leadership team worked around the clock setting up the new training programs and reviewing feedback from employees at every level of the company. The changes were not only visible in the structure of the bank, but in the attitudes of the staff. People began to speak up more openly, to share their experiences, and to contribute ideas for improving the workplace. But Jamal knew that change wasn't just about rolling out new programs. It was about changing mindsets, shifting how people viewed their roles and how they viewed the people they served. He wanted his employees to see every customer as a person with needs, not just a number to check off. He wanted them to understand that their actions, no matter how small, had an impact. One of the first steps was bringing in outside consultants to conduct unconscious bias training. It wasn't an easy conversation to have, but Jamal knew it was necessary. The training sessions were tough for some employees. Many didn't realize they had biases, let alone how those biases affected their decisions and behavior. But Jamal didn't let that stop him. He had seen the positive impact of this kind of training in his own company, and he knew it would make a difference here. As the weeks went by, Jamal began receiving reports from the regional directors. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Employees were engaging with the training programs, and customers were noticing the difference. There were fewer complaints, and people were more willing to share their thoughts on how the bank could improve. The energy had shifted. One day, Jamal received a phone call from Mark Harris, the regional director. Mark sounded upbeat as he shared the news. Jamal, I think we've really turned a corner. The staff at the branches are more engaged, more willing to learn, and it's showing in the way they interact with customers. People are starting to notice, Jamal smiled. It wasn't a perfect system yet, but it was a start. And that was all he needed. The change was happening, slowly but surely. People were beginning to understand that respect wasn't just a policy, it was a value that could shape a business, a community, and a future. Weeks had passed since the day Jamal walked into the bank and faced an unexpected experience at his own branch. A lot had changed since then. The new training programs were in full swing, and feedback from customers was steadily improving. But for Jamal, it wasn't about just one branch or one manager. It was about setting a new standard for the entire company. He believed in something bigger than rules and procedures. He believed in people. He believed that when people felt respected and valued, they did their best work. And when customers felt welcomed and heard, they stayed loyal. That belief was now shaping everything the company did. One morning, Jamal arrived at the same bank branch again. This time, he wasn't in disguise. He wore a clean-cut suit and had a relaxed smile on his face. The moment he walked through the door, The staff stood up a little straighter, smiles spreading across their faces. There was no tension, this time just a quiet excitement. The receptionist stood to greet him. "Good morning, Mr. Jamal. Welcome back." He nodded kindly. "Good morning. Just here to check in. You all are doing a great job." The entire team had been through the updated training sessions, and something was different now. Their confidence had grown, not just in their skills, but in how they worked together. They weren't just following steps anymore, they were building relationships with the people who walked through their doors. Jamal walked around the lobby and chatted with customers. He asked simple questions. "How was your service today? Is there anything we could do better?" Most people smiled and said things like, "Oh, much better than last time," or "Everyone is very kind here." Their answers were genuine, and their expressions told him all he needed to know. As he moved toward the office area, he saw a familiar face, Karen Whitmore. She stepped out of her office as soon as she noticed him. "Mr. Jamal," she said softly, with a warm and respectful tone. "Thank you for coming." "Karen," Jamal replied, shaking her hand. "How are things going?" She nodded, and for a moment she looked more confident than he remembered. "It's been a journey," she admitted. "But I've learned a lot about myself, about my team, and about what this job really means." Jamal smiled. "That's good to hear." Growth always starts with reflection. Karen gestured to a small conference room. "Would you like to sit for a moment?" Inside the atmosphere was calm. Karen sat down across from Jamal and shared how she had taken the training sessions seriously. She spoke about how she had started weekly team meetings where employees could openly share challenges and solutions. She had also encouraged her team to treat every customer as if they were the most important person they'd meet that day. "I realized," she said thoughtfully, "that it's not just about banking. It's about trust. People don't just come here to make deposits or withdrawals. They come here with goals, fears, and questions. And we have a chance to make them feel safe and understood." Jamal nodded. "That's exactly what I hoped." "What happened?" Karen paused and looked down for a moment. "I know I made a mistake that day. I didn't recognize you, and I treated you unfairly. But I'm grateful you turned that moment into something better, not just for me, but for everyone." "Here." Jamal's voice was kind. "We all make mistakes. What matters is how we respond to them." Later that day, Jamal attended a small internal ceremony hosted at the branch. It wasn't a public event, just a simple gathering of employees and a few senior leaders. There were no big cameras or speeches. But there was appreciation, and more importantly, there was growth. During the meeting, one of the young employees, a teller named Mia, stood up to share a few words. "When I first started here," she said shyly, "I was nervous. I didn't know if I'd fit in. But after the recent changes, I feel like my voice matters. We talk more as a team, we support each other, and I'm proud to be here." Her words were met with quiet applause. Jamal looked around the room, noticing the smiles, the nods, and the sense of unity. This was the kind of company he had always dreamed of building, not just successful in business, but strong in values. As the meeting ended, Jamal took a moment to thank everyone for their efforts. "What happened weeks ago could have been a small story," he said. "But together we turned it into something much bigger, a reminder that respect, kindness, and accountability must guide everything we do." He continued, "This branch is now a model for others. Not because it's perfect, but because it shows what's possible when we learn from our mistakes." He paused before finishing. "Let's carry this same energy into every branch, every department, and every day. That's how we build something that lasts." The day ended on a positive note. Employees returned to their desks with a renewed sense of pride. Customers left with smiles. And Jamal left knowing his message had truly taken root. Over the next several months, Jamal continued visiting other branches. He kept things casual, no press, no big announcements, just honest conversations and meaningful observations. He listened to his employees, learned from their stories, and used their feedback to guide company policy. What had started as one awkward experience at a single branch had turned into a complete shift in how the company operated. And Jamal had done it without shouting, without blame, just by leading with wisdom, calm, and integrity. He had reminded everyone that leadership wasn't about standing above others. It was about standing with them, helping them grow, giving them space to reflect, to learn, and to rise. By the end of that year, the bank had won 2 industry awards, one for innovation in customer service, and the other for best workplace culture. But for Jamal, the real reward was walking into any branch, seeing his employees smiling, customers feeling welcomed, and knowing that his values were being lived out daily. It had all started with a simple visit to a local branch where he was once turned away, but instead of anger, he chose action. Instead of pride, he chose purpose. And in doing so, he didn't just change a bank. He inspired a movement, one rooted in kindness, respect, and quiet strength. And that, in the end, was the true story